Johnny Two-Face here, back with another reaction video. This time reacting to the Battle of Prague 1757, Prussia's Pyrrhic victory by House of History. Now again, I'm carrying on with this series talking about Frederick the Great of Prussia, and if you haven't seen my reactions to the other episodes in this series, I suggest you check them out before checking this one out. And the usual disclaimer when I react to anything historical, if I don't show so much what is considered a proper reaction, is probably obvious. I don't know much about the subject at hand. I'm trying to take on new information, and if I do know anything, I'll most likely pause the video to give my input or ask any curious questions excuse me, which hopefully will be answered in the comments below. Pardon me. So anyway, the link to the original video will be in the description down below. Please go and subscribe to House of History, another great history channel here on YouTube, and they deserve all the support they can get. So please go and subscribe to House of History. Check out their channel, give them all the support you can, and I won't ramble on for too much longer. So let's get this up on screen and see what happens in Prague.
In spring 1757,
wait. For these videos, I forgot to mention, for these videos, I'm gonna put the captions on just in case there's any like foreign names I don't know how they're spelt or when they're pronounced. So it also helps other people watching this reaction. So.
Years' War's first autumn and winter campaign lay behind them. Europe stood at the brink of an enormous war,
which
the
7 Years' War
changed the course of history. Frederick the Great launched his spring campaign with a four-way invasion of Bohemia. In northeastern Bohemia, the first commander of his army to face combat was the Duke of Brunswick-Bevern. At Reichenberg, he managed to rout the Habsburg army meant to push back the Prussians. For Frederick, it was a promising start of the campaign. The invasion continued with momentum. 2 days after Reichenberg, Frederick crossed into Bohemia, expelled the Austrians from Linné, and positioned himself strategically to outflank the large Austrian army under Field Marshal Braun at Budin. Braun's reinforcements, commanded by Duke Arenberg, hadn't arrived yet, so Braun decided to retreat to the northwest of Prague. Meanwhile, the Prince of Anhalt-Dessau linked up with Frederick at Linné. To their east, Bevern captured Jungbunzlau, linking up with the 73-year-old Field Marshal Schwerin. The storehouses nearby ensured the ability to feed their 40,000 soldiers for close to a month. Thanks to their victory at Reichenberg, they would be able to form the right to Frederick's left pincer movement of the Bohemian capital. The Austrians were aware of the danger they faced. In the Austrian camp, Braun frantically tried to get his men ready for combat. As all these parties began planning for the inevitable upcoming battle, a well-known commander arrived in Braun's camp. Prince Charles of Lorraine, commander-in-chief of the Habsburg army, arrived in Prague in early May. The city was in disarray, fleeing citizens and decaying defenses. He took over command, and despite internal friction, every party understood it was the right move. Braun suffered from severe tuberculosis, but he remained in the field despite his condition. Charles called a council of war. They agreed they should meet Koenigsegg's corps, retreating and still shaken from Reichenberg, near Prague, on the right bank of the Moldau.
I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Established Titles. The silver lining in all my historical videos is that it is filled with dukes, counts, princes and lords standing at the forefront of writing history.
Feel free to check out their sponsor if you're interested.
They marched from Moravia towards Königgrätz. Although they were in danger for now, their numbers were rapidly increasing. Charles augmented Prague's garrison with 13,000 troops. The remainder of the army, close to 60,000 soldiers, took their positions around.
Just out of curiosity, what defences are here in Silesia? Because I suppose it'll take too long for Count Van Dohn to go around through Silesia and come at the Prussians from the rear. I suppose that will take too long. But that seems like a good plan, to come all the way round through Silesia. But then again, don't know what defences are left behind in Silesia.
Around the eastern part of the city. Meanwhile, the Prussians continued their advance. Frederick learned of the Austrians taking up their positions to the city's east. Marshal Keith, commanding 32,000 soldiers, remained on the left bank of the Moldau, while Frederick linked up with Schwerin to Prague's northeast. He commanded up to 64,000 troops. On the morning of May 6, Prince Charles wasn't worried about what the day would bring. His army held strong defensive positions, and even more reinforcements were on their way.
But his confidence that day would be calm was misplaced. At around 5:30 a.m., Charles received alarming news from his irregulars. Austrian outposts were pushed back around Prussia. 30 minutes later, Charles ordered the battle formations. It seemed like a full-scale attack was imminent. Charles positioned his army to the north of Malachitz, a small village, to Prague's east. His left flank rested against the Zizka hill. His command spanned along the Tabor hill towards Kiev. Brown held the command of Austria's right wing, sharply, bending south along Sterbohol. His right was held by cavalry. In total, up to 62,000 troops were deployed outside Prague. 70 infantry battalions, 124 cavalry squadrons, and up to 200 guns. Several thousand, including 5,000 cavalry, remained inside the city's walls. The Battle of Prague was a muddled and chaotic affair, even more than usual. As such, reconstructing certain parts of the battle is challenging and sometimes open to interpretation. Those first skirmishes at Prussia, alarming Charles, were conducted by Schwerin and Winterfeld. They commanded 2 columns. After taking Prussia, their army awaited Frederick's arrival. When he arrived a bit after 6 a.m., the Prussian army's size swelled to 64,000. In total, the Prussian king commanded 66 infantry battalions, 123 cavalry squadrons, and around 190 artillery pieces. The Prussians enjoyed a slight numerical superiority. But the king was in quite a sorry state. He suffered severe food poisoning and could barely ride his horse without throwing up. After a brief deliberation...
Slightly off topic, I've had food poisoning twice and it's not pleasant.
...with his generals, they decided to move fast and concentrate the attack along the Austrian right flank. The Prussians immediately began their march with Lieutenant General Johann Karl Schönegg's dragoons moving far in advance as the vanguard. When Charles noticed this, he sent units from the center to augment the right. Some 15 regiments of cavalry under General Andras Prussia and 40 grenadier companies were concentrated around Sterbohol. The Austrian cavalry arrived just in time. Schönegg's dragoons launched a frontal cavalry charge, countered by the freshly arrived Austrians. A prolonged cavalry fight followed, lasting for the remainder of the battle. Meanwhile, in the background, Schwerin and Winterfeld led their soldiers past Possarnitz. They faced continuous artillery shelling. Because the Prussian artillery could not traverse the marshy ground, they all concentrated along one narrow road. Cluttered with heavy guns, the road became obstructed. Consequently, the infantry had to walk through the marshy meadows and fields. Frankly, the terrain was quite inhospitable for the infantry, and men were already tiring. Finally, Schwerin's 14 infantry regiments took up their positions, facing the majority of Brown's infantry between Sterbohol and Kay. Frederick commanded the center, Schwerin in the left, Winterfeld commanded the right vanguard. Realizing the delay's danger, Winterfeld decided not to wait for official orders and ordered his 8 battalions to charge. They moved forward in their characteristic disciplined formation like a moving wall,
It will probably answer my question, but wouldn't you say that Schwerin was doing a martial neigh?
traversing water, reaching their way.
For those who watch Epic History TV's Napoleonic Wars series will know what I'm talking about.
They received orders not to fire until they came close to the Austrian lines. Frederick
That's
was
risky.
unhappy with the early assault. Old Schwerin disagreed. Frische Eier, gute Eier, he said, meaning something like the early bird gets the worm, before leading his men into battle as well. Those were the last words he would ever speak to his king. The Austrian artillery on the Homolo hill and the grenadiers standing on its slopes fired volley after volley.
Wow.
Not retaliating, the Prussians suffered enormous casualties. The front lines received the brunt of the damage, and several units were near entirely decimated, if not routed. Moreover, the poor terrain conditions considerably slowed down their advance. General Winterfeld was among the front lines, leading by example. During the advance, an accurate shot hit him in the neck.
Wow.
He was severely wounded as he fell from his horse. Schwerin and several of his most trusted officers moved forward to carry Winterfeld back to safety. Schwerin rode in the front as his men carried Winterfeld away, ready to lead by example. As he continued the advance, a canister blast mortally struck his head, removing most of it. He died on impact. Austrian artillery continued tearing through Prussian lines. The charge had been an absolute disaster so far. The battle had been going on for a while now, and at around 11 a.m. the Austrian inroads against the Prussian lines showed. Things were not looking good. Confident he was capitalizing on his success, Braun launched what he was confident would be the last charge against the Prussians.
Wow.
But nearby the city of Kay, held by Königsegg, the Prussian commanders noticed a gap between Charles's north-facing troops and Braun's eastern lines. The charge would prove to be a crucial mistake. Beveren commanded the infantry nearby, although sources indicate regimental commanders acted on their own accord. They mounted a full charge. Facing little resistance, they managed to flank Königsegg's infantry. Suddenly, the Austrian position did not seem so stable. Braun's men fiercely resisted the Prussians, and savage combat broke out. This charge nearby Kay is generally considered to be the turning point of the battle.
I would say so.
During all this intense fighting, more misfortune struck the Austrians. A cannonball struck Braun. It shattered his leg, and he had to be carried away from the battlefield. As the fortunes were changing for Austria, they were left leaderless. Throughout the entire battle, General von Zieten had been roaming the rear of the Prussian lines. All the way to the south, he saw an opening of the Austrian right flank. He didn't think for too long, and he ordered his hussars to launch a charge against Hadik. The clash was enormous and somewhat unexpected. The impact quickly spread through the Austrian lines like a shockwave. Suddenly, Zieten turned the indecisive cavalry battle. Many infantry regiments realized the sudden gravity of the situation. They were close to getting stuck in a pincer movement. All troops between Sterbohol and Hostavitz collapsed. Many retreated towards Prague, and a significant force retreated to the south. During this, Prince Charles collapsed. It is unclear what happened, but he likely suffered a seizure, leaving him incapacitated. Austrian commanders rallied some retreating Austrian infantry behind the Tabor Hill. As the Prussians chased the infantry, fierce resistance blocked their passage. They inflicted heavy casualties. Meanwhile, Manstein became frustrated with his lack of combat. He decided to launch a charge of his own accord. To his right stood Prince Henry, who crossed the Rokenitzer stream to support Manstein in a famous event. The Austrians holding the northern lines put up fierce resistance, but both commanding generals were quickly killed. The infantry soon gave way.
Prince Henry appeared to the northwest of the Austrian lines. To their south, von Zieten advanced along Neustrassnitz. Again, the Austrians risked becoming stuck in a pincer movement and retreated towards Prague. The Austrian cavalry remained disciplined enough to continue brief counterattacks, protecting their infantry during the entire retreat. Most soldiers managed to find refuge in Prague, though a force of around 12,000 fled to the south. Pursuing them was unthinkable. The battlefield was littered with dead and dying men. The casualties during the battle mounted to astonishing levels. Contemporary plays and ballads referring to the battle used it synonymously for slaughter and massacre. The Prussians suffered 3,099 dead, 8,208 wounded, with many succumbing to their injuries, and 1,657 missing. 400 officers were among the killed. 1 field marshal, 1 general, and 3 other generals were mortally wounded. These official figures are commonly thought to be underreported, with the actual figures being even higher. The Austrians suffered fewer.
This is why I was saying, it's probably redundant me saying this, but this is why you really got to learn history with an open mind, because unfortunately, unless you were there or you got a time machine, you do have to rely on these evidence.
Number of casualties,
even though someone could be exaggerated.
Again, among them some 400 officers. Many of them were prisoners of war. Sure, it was a Prussian victory, but an incredibly costly one at that. The death of several senior officers on both sides and Frederick's incapacitation due to food poisoning made the entire battle quite a muddled affair. Besides Schwerin and Winterfeld, Generals Fouquet and Courcelles were severely injured, while their regiments suffered over 50% casualties. Frederick later wrote to King George he lost Schwerin, who he referred to as one of the greatest generals of the century. But admitting his losses wasn't the same as admitting the battle had been more costly than he anticipated. To his sister, he wrote he had totally beaten the Austrian army. They are entirely separated, and I hope to take most of the generals and soldiers in Prague as prisoners of war. His mother received a letter in which he boasted of being free with 150,000 men, while he dispersed the Austrians in the wind. This was all window dressing, to put it bluntly. In private, Frederick admitted to the gravity of the situation. He blamed more or less every subordinate of his, and surviving letters reveal his generals and his brothers blamed him in turn. But he did learn from his mistakes. For example, firing volleys during marching was a tactic he disavowed, but now reinstated. As a result, his troops would never again have to hold fire during their advance forward.
Wow.
As for Austria, the defeat certainly put Vienna on high alert. Their French allies weren't too impressed with their conduct. The cannonball shattering Brown's legs proved fatal. He died on June 26. Austria was one of her best, if not the best general, Frederick wrote. The battle's aftermath didn't play in Frederick's favor. Over 46,000 soldiers now defended Prague, and it soon turned out they were well provisioned, contrary to what Frederick assumed. And remember the 12,000 odd troops who didn't flee Prague but turned south? Well, in the southeast, Austrian Field Marshal Daun was assembling a 55,000 strong army welcoming most of these soldiers. Frederick established siege batteries and bravely bombarded Prague. But once news reached him of Daun's large Austrian army, he decided he would not be able to continue the siege of Prague with this danger looming. He began preparing the march towards his next battle, which would become the famous Battle of Kolin. Thank you very much for watching this video. If there's a topic, battle, or event you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I would... that'll do it. This being another interesting video by House of History, and yeah, even though it was a Prussian victory, it was very costly. And as the narrator explained, it's Frederick liked to under-exaggerate his the gravity of his costs. So anyway, if you like this reaction, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.